when I was writing 900 square feet, the email earlier today, I had put in that Olympic sports are under assault. And I said, God, I don't know if that's right. And then I said, well, they're vulnerable. And then I was like, no, they're both. And we've got to talk about it. And sports are being dropped. I know more, of course, about volleyball, and Jaime Gordon's here for that. But Samantha has swimming programs that are being dropped, and Mike is dealing with wrestling programs being dropped and the threat of more. And so I'll open it up, start with Samantha.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about wrestling and volleyball and swimming and diving programs right now, but by the way, there's programs that are being dropped that go far beyond the three sports, or the four if you separate us out to two. And so for us, collectively, I think I can safely say that it's we have to do two things simultaneously. We have to think about broad-based sports and what that means to our education system, and to a model that we've all enjoyed and benefited from. And we need to make sure that all sports are protected to some degree. And we also have to make sure that our individual sports are strengthening and elevating and evolving over time. So we have to do both. We have to take care of our own sports, and then we also collectively have to think about what this model looks like if it is reduced down to two, four, six sports only. And is that a space we want to live? For me, I think the answer is clearly no, but it's not just about swimming and diving or wrestling and volleyball. It's about the whole enterprise that has served hundreds of thousands well, both in the collegiate space, but also when you think about grassroots and you think about Team USA and all the delegations that are not Team USA that are also part of this, right? Like it's a model that is valuable and valued around the world. And so protecting it is, in my mind, critical.
Well, to your point, I mean, last week when Stephen F. Austin told us that they were dropping beach volleyball, men's and women's golf, and also bowling. But there was a telling comment in their news release, which was not attributed to the athletic director, but I'm sure was a quote from him that the SID was told to put in there. And it said, SFA joins a growing number of institutions across the country that have decided to discontinue athletic teams, citing the financial pressures tied to the changing college athletics landscape, including the looming $2.8 billion House versus NCAA settlement. And Mike, lines like that got to put shivers down your spine.
Yeah, they really do. I think what we're trying to do as a coalition of coaches associations is to really help the general public understand why it's important to protect broad-based Olympic sport programs. And once people understand why it's important, I think finding solutions becomes easier. But I think we just have to continue. Like one of the things we talk about, and it's very important, is the intercollegiate is the farm system for the Olympic movement. But maybe 1% of college athletes ever go to the Olympics or go pro. The 99% of them, become doctors and lawyers and school teachers and astronauts and you name it. And so, we know that there's a lot of great leaders across the country at every level that come through the intercollegiate sports system. In our case, wrestling's got the second largest percentage of first generation college bound students. So it's not just about a place to participate in college, but it's also about access to college for a large number of students that otherwise are economically disadvantaged, wouldn't even have a chance to go to college. So, we could spend hours talking about why it's important, but we have to make sure that the general public and the politicians and everybody involved understands what's at stake here and why this needs to be a no-fail mission to protect base programs.
Yeah, Jaime, like as you've been well documented these past couple of weeks, I mean, that's what you're talking about, the lack of opportunity. Plus, from the coaches' end, and you guys are all heads of coaches associations, and I got a lot of friends who are coaches. These are their jobs. These are how they feed their families. This is how they help people and do what they do. And Jaime, you've been very vocal, and which we all appreciate.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it too, because we represent our coaches and these are their jobs and their lifestyles. That's how they put food on the table and pay their mortgages. But it was also the genesis point for them getting into coaching at a high percentage. It was, them having that opportunity to compete in collegiate athletics and know what it meant for their development, and their experiential learning in going through that. So as Mike alluded, you limit these opportunities, you eliminate people who are teachers and change makers and have impacts, on lives. Lee, you talk about the release that Stephen F. Austin put out. And there's more coming. I'm sure we'll see some more this week as well. And there's this really odd emotion that goes because, like, for example, Purdue Fort Wayne made an announcement at the end of last week, and that's one of the locations that our men's volleyball has a strong tradition in knowing that they're vulnerable. And when I first read that there's 2 sports being dropped, my heart initially goes down. And then there's this area that I feel guilty about because then when I read that it's baseball and softball, I go, phew, it wasn't men's volleyball, but it's still a problem. And that's still a lot of young people that are missing opportunities, and those opportunities don't come back. And when we look at, this, whether it's a pyramid or a funnel, based on which way you put it, that funnel is getting tighter and tighter at the Division I level. And so the opportunities that young people start to have, they don't flow through as easily. And that's something that we've got to figure out a way to create some guardrails and protect.
Well, Samantha and I were both swimmers. She was good. I was a walk-on who swam 1 year, but I played water polo in college and now continue literally 50 years later. And the memories that I have and the friendships and the opportunities that brought for me, I can't overstate. And Samantha, you're the same way. I mean, at James Madison, you weren't going to go to the Olympics. You weren't going to swim on a professional level. Of course, you were a little bit before that time, but those opportunities created for you and your teammates can't be replicated.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's the transformational versus transactional conversation that so many of us are having at this moment. It's, and I don't think like there's a real great solution to put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, around the athletes that are doing these exceptional things. Like I've talked so many times about being at like a basketball game, a crosstown rivalry, and just from the lens I've now, I guess maybe earned through this job, you're watching a basketball game that's packed at a mid-major level, and you're like, everybody is either paying to be here or is paid to be here, except for the athletes that are gathering people here. So like there is a real conversation that needs to be had around supporting athletes that are driving revenue. There's no disputing that, but I do think like there's a real conversation that also needs to be had about what type of revenue are they driving and what type of expenses are they incurring and how is that impacting the broader programs. And so I would just say that, and when you get to all of these programs across the board, basketball and football included, like the transformations that happens to those young athletes from the time they're recruited by these coaches to the time they graduate, which for our coaches is probably somewhere around the range of 2,000 hours spent with these athletes. These coaches, it's not just their livelihoods, it's their passions. They are making great citizens. They're part of the process of developing like lawyers and people who are curing cancer and Rhodes Scholars. And I just don't think professionalizing a system for 22% at the risk of 78% is really a place that we want to go. There's got to be a way that we can provide solutions. I think that we've got some good ideas. I don't think they're the only ideas that need to be considered, but it's certainly worth protecting.
Well, if I could say, like with Jamie, we in our sport of volleyball, we go into next year, for example, knowing that just a dozen or so teams can win the national championship. Maybe 3 programs are profitable. Mike, I'll go out on a limb and say there aren't a lot of wrestling programs that pay for themselves. So the vast majority of the coaches coaching, the athletes involved, and everyone else is doing it for back for the opportunity and the love of the sport. And those things enhance the entire college experience. But I feel better saying all that. But what can be done? You know, Jamie, Mike, what can you guys do? And
Well,
what
I
can
think,
other people in your same positions in all of the other sports? Because we've already mentioned golf, tennis, baseball, softball, you know, and and Jamie, like you said, it's not going to end here.
yeah, I think for sure, sports needs to operate in a more business-like fashion, but it's not unlike any other academic program. It's not really unlike the chemistry department or the history department or you name it. I don't think we should ever apologize for a young man or woman or boy or girl who's learning how to compete while they're learning all about science and math and reading and writing. Let's face it, when you get in the real world, you're competing every day. You're competing for a job, you're competing for a raise, you're competing for a promotion, you're competing for everything you do. And to me, I think that's a really important part of the educational process. Do I think, we can operate in a more business-like fashion? Absolutely. In fact, in our sport community, we have a CEO leadership academy where we try to teach coaches, how to really sharpen their business skills and, how to make their programs less susceptible to being eliminated. But the idea that we should only have sports that are profitable, I think most people don't realize there's only 25 or 30 college football teams out there that are actually profitable, that generate more revenue than expense. So I think to keep things in the perspective of educationally based athletics, to treat them like other educationally based programs, um, we can be more frugal. I think in a lot of ways, it's not necessarily that we have a revenue problem; we have a spending problem. And yeah, I think if we look at the way we spend money a little closer, I think we could have broader sports programs. From my experience, I've been in intercollegiate athletics for 40 some years. Generally, the more expensive it becomes to operate athletic departments, that broad-based model gets threatened. And so somehow we need a way of sort of, having some type of a compromise between those programs that are truly profitable and are filling up those 100,000 seat stadiums and balancing that with, the 78% of athletes that are really benefiting from the broad-based programs that have historically existed.
I can only imagine how much money Stephen F. Austin saved by dropping bowling. Uh, Jamie, what should people do? What should we do? What should the people watching in their respective sports, and what should people do?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can't do is be ignorant to it or to think that this thing is just going to work itself out. Some of my earlier conversations up in DC, some of the Congress people who are, really committed and invested in collegiate athletics thinks, oh, I've heard this before. It'll pass. There's the money and things like that. And that's just not the case. So I think at other times where other people have rung the warning bell, this one's this one's for real. This is because it's happening and it's happening in a different way. When we look at times, where there were increases in dropped programs, coming off of the 2008 financial crisis, we saw a big, increase in elimination of sponsorships. COVID, during COVID and coming right out of that, we saw another one. But those were, again, revenue problems. Now we have a massive point of a spending problem at a time where revenue has never been higher, is projected to continue to go up, yet we are in this self-inflicted crisis. And I think the way that people can help is to be able to just even say, hey, this is not okay in the direction that we're going. We need to create some guardrails here. Maybe we need to correct some of our spending habits. The the just football coaching staff at Ohio State. Okay, so just the coaches, not all the quarter zips that join them, but all of just the coaching staff. Their salary pool is greater than the coaching staff at the Cleveland Browns and the coaching staff of the Cincinnati Bengals combined. So for the price of what you're paying your Ohio State coaches, you could actually afford 2 NFL staffs in the same state. And that shows that, hey, there's an opportunity for correction. It's not a popular one. It's not an easy one. But to your point, to say that, hey, cutting bowling or wrestling or swimming or men's volleyball or beach volleyball is going to move the needle, it's not. At times, I think it even becomes an excuse to consolidate.
No, and that coaching staff at Ohio State, that's a lot of bowling programs. Because we all have hard outs, and because Samantha and I are the swimmers, and swimming, I believe, to be the most popular participational sport in America. And if it's not, it's got to be very close. There are more swimmers than anybody. So, Samantha, you get the last word.
Oh man, no pressure there. I would just, I think if I don't know, I don't know who's listening, but to anybody who's listening, I think what I would say is that there are solutions, right? And I think anytime there's agitation, I think there's also opportunity. And as Jamie had alluded to, that opportunity to make changes is not always popular. It's not always easy. It's probably going to upset the vocal minority, but it's also probably critical at this pivotal time. And so I think, we're going to continue. I know our groups, other coaches associations are going to continue to work from the front and lead from the front on this. And joining in and having a voice, saying that it's not right. And because I do think that there's opportunity here to do something really special. But I think we also have to acknowledge what we've got is worth protecting and worth saving.
Well, for all of you watching, especially our friends in the volleyball world, if you're a coach and you're not a member of the avca.org, shame on you. If you're a wrestler and involved in wrestling, please join the National Wrestling Coaches Association. And swimmers and divers, become members of the College Swimming and Diving Coaches Association. And those of you not in those 3 sports who are catching this, do what you can. And I thank all of you guys. I really appreciate this. And Jamie, thank you for helping pull this together.
No problem, Lee. Appreciate you giving us the time to share.